group meeting. So this is different than our work sessions where we will have a phone line that is available for folks to listen in on the work sessions. These meetings are recorded. So I believe Sharon will get us going here on a recording. And this is also an opportunity for if anybody misses a meeting to be able to catch up and kind of see where we are and have some context. Awesome. I see that we do have the recording going. Great. So for our bicycle rack, just again, appreciation for the use of this. Last time we did have a comment asking for, there's a lot of acronyms out there and that are new. So just thank you for naming that. And that's really important for us to pause and reflect and get better at really describing what we mean and being really intentional with explaining some of these acronyms. So what we have is a little reference tool that we are hoping, if things come up, because we don't always know what is unfamiliar or what is new, you all have editing access to this. So you can add anything that comes up in our presentation or as we move through this work together. Please add it to this document and we'll make sure to loop back around, or if you all know there's tremendous wisdom in this group, please let's share the knowledge so we can support each other in our growing. And I'll just name that coming from a district into state level work, there were many and still are a ton of acronyms that are very new to me. So just appreciate that reminder. Okay, and if we can move on. I'm going to turn this over to Beth at this time.
Yeah, we just want to say thank you so much for taking the time to fill out the feedback survey on the areas that went well for you last time, where we could improve, and questions and concerns that arise. We just want you to know we always value your input and feedback and use that to make revisions as we go along and get better. So we just want to briefly share some of the highlights from the feedback, and what we heard that went well were there was just a lot of gratitude for the breakout room time and beautiful appreciation for each other in your group. So it was really beautiful to read that. And then the opportunity to learn from TSPC. We had Kristen here last time sharing about their work, and you all also appreciated the state examples and thought they were helpful. And then there was a lot of appreciation for a clear purpose and meeting agenda that balanced going deep while being able to move us forward because we have that really quick timeline. And then you all had mentioned, or a few of you had mentioned again, appreciating the resources in advance. So we've sent that out for you to review. And then appreciation for creating safe spaces and activities that invite people in to share perspectives and thoughts. So that was some of the great things that we heard from you. And then some areas that we could improve and focus on are continuing to send those materials out, more breakout room time and countdowns to return to the larger group. There's some nervousness around the timeline and all the work and writing that needs to happen. And we hope that as you're moving forward today, you'll have some of your nerves kind of assured that we're moving ahead and we'll be all right. We're going to be good. And then also there was some concerns about doing grade band levels and the need for them to be culturally appropriate and developmental across the lifespan. So we'll talk about that in a bit. And then implementation considerations for administrators to support this work with teachers and in their schools. There was some feedback on sharing what are the opportunities for us to share about the work and how could that be communicated out to superintendents and to districts. And then Vanessa mentioned about the glossary terminology for acronyms and anything else that we needed to add in there. And then was just to consider the length of breaks. So based on all that feedback, you can see here some of the changes that we made. And yeah, just let us know, keep giving us feedback, and we'll ask for that at the end again. So thank you so much. We'll move on to the agenda. So our session, each time we meet, they're going to be structured around CASEL's 3 signature practices. So CASEL is the Collaborative for Academic Socio-Emotional Learning. It's just a way for us, again, to structure and embed SEL practices in our meetings. So here you can see our warm welcome today. That's going to promote rituals and activities for inclusion will be our 2-word check-in that we did. We're going to go over our timeline and outcomes again. And we're going to quickly revisit our community agreements and ground us for today. And then we're going to embed our connection activity around agency and self-management when you get into your work groups in a little bit. For the core of our meeting, it's going to be the engaging practices. So here we're going to provide you all with some sense making and some brain breaks built in. So we're going to hear from Alexa, our director, around the State Board of Education's authority. We're going to revisit the grain size for standards and the proposal, and then just give you a bunch of writing time again. And then we're going to bring you all back and hear about some sharing and noticings again from how you've been progressing. And then last, we'll wrap up with optimistic closure to give us time for reflection and looking forward. So hopefully you'll all be able to fill out this feedback survey, let us know how it's going. We'll talk about some next steps, and then we'll wrap up with a one breath, one word. We move to the next slide, and I apologize, I'm moving a little bit fast because we have a really packed first half of information for you all, and I also have a cold, so thank you for bearing with me. Trying to do the best I can today. So for meeting outcomes for today, we're going to have you all going to break into your work groups. We're going to cover what standards are, benchmarks are, so just a regrounding in the common language understanding that we're trying to create. Also framework groups. So we're going to give the framework group a chance to connect together and really kind of dive in deep. So here you can see what all will be covered for today. And then I'll hand it over to Vanessa.
Thank you, Beth. And so just to kind of orient us in terms of where we are right now. So we're at our December 15th meeting. So this was kind of backing up into the early morning session, which many of you were able to attend, and thinking about what's coming next. So our January 12th meeting is really, that's the space where we want to spend a lot of our advisory group time, which will be in the morning, to really provide feedback to each other about what is coming up for you as we look at this holistically, not just in your own small work groups, which you'll spend most of your time today. And then kind of zooming out, we do have this opportunity on January 26th. Beth, myself, and Alexa Pearson will be presenting at OACOA conference, which is in Salishan at the coast. And we are hoping that that is an opportunity for us to bring forward the standards and the benchmarks to a group of administrative folks and district leaders to get some initial thoughts about how those are being developed. So that engagement has been really key. And so that's our first chance to really hear from others as we're in progress. So that's what we're orienting towards. And then if you see the February 9th, that is the main big marker milestone. That is where we want to have a real draft that we are starting to feel very confident in. Where we may be wordsmithing and looking at some things more fine-tunedly, but we want to have a holistic kind of big picture and sense of, are we moving towards consensus? So that will be that meeting in February. And then in March, we want to be starting to think about engagement, and we'll have a survey that will go out to all of Oregonians, as well as have some intentional focus groups to hear from student success advisory groups that have had a hand in shaping these from the very beginning. So more on that to come, but just wanted us to center ourselves in where we are right now. So with that, if we can move to the next slide, and I'm just going to kind of go over this a little bit quicker. This is a little bit more fine-tuned, so going a little bit deeper. And so what you see at the top are the dates of our actual meetings, and then when the work sessions are happening and when the advisory group meetings are happening. And that distinction is important because during our whole group meetings, that's when we will be having to vote and we will need a quorum. And so those are the ones that are really need to be prioritized in terms of our time together as a collective. So again, you should be able to reference this along the way. So if we can move to the next, we can keep moving. And then I will turn it back to
Yeah, just a quick reminder here are our agreements. And then especially as we move it into our collaboration time, just really holding our agreements close for how we show up and how we interact with each other. And, feel free to pick one that maybe you want to hold close today as you're working in collaboration. That would be fantastic. And then I will, if we move on to the next slide. We were going to do a connection activity, but what we're going to do is we're going to hold that until you move into your breakout groups. And so what we'll do is just ask you to share with your smaller breakout room your artifact, and it will be around this. So it's we've asked you to bring the artifact or share a connection or story that brings life to the concept of agency and self-management. And so we just ask for you to share that within your own group when you meet with each other. So if you move to the next slide, this is just a little bit, if you're following us in the slide deck, if you have a copy of that, you'll see here just a little bit more of the focal construct agency and then the competency self-management. And then if we move forward, so we are gonna, keep moving forward, and then I'll hand it over to Vanessa. Vanessa, you're muted.
I am muted, yes. All right, so so I have invited Alexa to come in. She is our SIS team director, so she oversees a lot of the standards work that is happening across the agency and that is being implemented across our schools and districts. And really to speak to, we heard a lot about like, well, what is really within the scope of our work here in this group? And what is the authority of the State Board of Education? Who is the group, the body that will be responsible for adopting the standards? So we have invited her to come in and just share with us a little bit about what kind of lens to look at this through as we think about what is within their sphere of control and their sphere of influence. So with that, just appreciation. Nice to have you here, Alexa. Appreciate you spending a little moment with us today.
Well, I appreciate being here. And I just got one of those, when you're always about to present and you get one of those things that's like internet unstable. So just wave your hands if I start breaking up. My college students are home from school. So I have 3 teenagers and somehow I don't know, they're streaming, they're doing something. I don't know what they're doing, but let me know if that happens. So just want to start again. My name is Alexa Pearson. I use she, her pronouns, and I am just filled with gratitude. I thought when they said they were going to schedule a meeting today, I was like, okay, you're going to get 3 people here, but good luck. And just to see the commitment. So thank you so much for being here. And I know it's a really busy time of year. So deep gratitude. I have been at ODE. I was a school principal prior to this, and I've been at ODE now. This is going on my 4th year. I landed here right before the pandemic, and I learned a lot about state government. So I'm sharing this. Some of you might, as I share this piece, might be like, yeah, I already know this. And some of you, if you were like me, I just was always like, ODE, why are you doing this? And now I understand, oh, ODE just does what the legislature tells them, and they help interpret it for schools. So I don't know why that was new to me, but somehow. And what I want to share is that with HB 20, I know what Vanessa and Beth, and I've been to some of these meetings, been talking a lot, that there's this desire and urge to get to the implementation phase of what these standards will look like. And a lot of the implementation pieces will take funding. And so just to kind of set the scope and the purview of what we're being asked to do here is that House Bill 2166 really asks ODE to put together, to convene a committee, and that's what we did. And they say exactly like when we have to have this by. I'm sure you've read the law and the statute around this, and to develop the standards, to write student standards, and to have this advisory group write the student standards. And when we wrote, by the way, just to also give a little bit of context, when we wrote this, the only way that we were able to hire an SEL specialist, it's not like we could say, hey, we should have a SEL specialist at ODE. We can't just say, let's hire somebody. We have to get position authority from the legislature. So when we put forth this legislative concept, and this was one that went from ODE wrote it, it had to be approved by the governor. The governor had to say, Kate Brown had to say, yes, this is one we want to put forth. And then it goes through the committees. And we had said, in order to have this, in order for us to write SEL standards, we need to have an SEL specialist. And so that was legislatively, that's how Vanessa Martinez was hired. And that was in the last legislative session. So for us, we realize with some of the implementation, there's going to be a gap here because it stopped at adopt the standards. And that's all the legislation said. And so we have put forth, just so you know, that ODE has put forth what we call policy option package. There's legislative concepts and there's policy option package. And the policy option package means we're asking for some funding with this. We put forth something to say, hey, we're going to need some funding to help districts with implementation on this. That we have a governor change. So the governor may decide that is not one I want to take up. That she may decide that that is one she wants to take up. And we'll learn more about that in this next legislative session and what happens there. ODE also can't advocate. I can't say to you all, hey, if you really want this to happen, go out to your representatives and talk to them. We can't do that. We can provide information like I'm providing right now of like, what does the bill say and what is our responsibility? And that's also true with the state board. The state board, absolutely. We have this amazing state board of education. If you've watched any of they are fantastic. And they are so excited when they heard the report that we gave last year and the focus that we are really, really centering our transformative SEL standards and that we're centering equity. They want to promote it, but they also don't have a budget. The State Board of Education doesn't have a budget. They also have to go through their own routes of, through the legislative routes. If they can promote, they can approve, they can make recommendations to us. So I just wanted to set that frame because I think sometimes we get really excited and we'll move to that piece around and we just have some implementation or we have some guardrails on what we can do, what the legislation is asking us to do. So the ask of this group is how do we create K-12 student standards? And the state board then has to adopt those. And we also have the timeline that we have to have by September 2023 with districts implementing in 24. So I hope that's helpful. I don't know if it is or not. And again, some of you might be nodding your head like, yes, we already know this. Some of you this might be brand new information. I will say it was new information for me coming at the state level, but Vanessa asked if I could come and speak to that, Vanessa and Beth. So if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. And Vanessa, hopefully I covered everything. I have a little Post-it note. I often forget the things.
Any questions? All right. Well, thank you, Alexa. I really appreciate you helping us figure all of that out. There's a lot of processes that are happening at all times at ODE. So it's helpful just to kind of orient and think about, okay, who does what and how? So especially as we think about our audience, who is going to be, our first audience will be the state board. And then beyond that will be our educators and folks in districts and ESDs that are going to help support these standards. So we kind of have two different audiences happening at the same time. So that can lead to some confusion too. All right, so if we can go back, Sharon, to our slide deck and resume at slide 32, that'd be awesome. And essentially what we wanted to do is revisit and kind of reground ourselves in some of the conversations that have already taken place around what these standards should look like and considerations for us. And so that's what we want to kind of look towards as we are in the midst and in the flow of actually developing them right now after some time here in the shared space together. So here, what you see are what is in the phase 1 advisory group's preliminary description. And there are really three kind of overarching themes that come up from that body of work and that group's thinking. And so the first one is this idea of sufficient flexibility. So we want to make sure that the standards are flexible, nimble enough to be able to be integrated across all the contents. So ranging from high school, right, where we tend to specialize, all the way from K-5 where you have all of these content areas. So we know that that's best research shows that SEL really takes root when it's embedded and integrated in what we already do. So that's one piece of it. Another piece is that we want to consider how we show up differently at any given moment. So there was real thought behind this developmental progression idea and thinking about stress, toxic stress, traumatic experiences, racism, microaggressions, all of those things play a role in how we show up in any given moment. So to be able to note that, and that there's not a prescribed and only one way of being that is going to be consistent across all the diversity of who we are, right, in Oregon. So that was important to name and was named in the phase 1 report. And then also this idea of focusing really on the system pieces and the environment in which SEL happens. So a lot of the framework tried to almost distance itself a little bit about how prescriptive to be with the student standards. So while that's important and necessary, that we also want to attend to all the other components. And that's kind of where the framework comes in. So thinking about, what is needed to also keep the focus on the systems, the structures, the learning environments in our districts and in our classrooms and in our schools. So those are just some helpful language to turn back to. And then if we can move to the next one, in the guiding principle, we have a whole guiding principle dedicated to this idea of developmentally appropriate. So in there, we can turn to find, especially as we think about indicators, what we want that to look like. And so we have some helpful language that is helping us bridge from this report into current practice. So it is to affirm and build on strengths. So this idea of building on each child's strengths. So we want to be able to notice that, affirm that, and build off from there. And then really to design and implement learning environments to help children achieve their full potential. So that's where in the framework, what does that look like? What are those best practices, dispositions, things that we might be doing to really foster the learning environment? And then culturally, linguistically, and ability appropriate for each child. So that is why the advisory group wanted to move away from grade level bands, because wherever we are, depending on our language, our cultural backgrounds, it's going to be different. And so we don't want to be having to judge or have our bias show up in how we decide or think about where a student is on any given standard, right, or progression. So that is why we're moving away, and what you'll see in the draft documents, we're not doing grade bands, we're keeping it more developmentally focused so that it is more around that, yes, at any given moment, we can be on different parts of this learning progression. Claudia, I see your hand up.
Just in reference to the grade bands, I noticed that when we separate it into groups, our actual roles and responsibilities are separated into grade bands. So can you touch on that a little bit more?
Yeah, so the reason that we did that was for really internally to get a sense of, because these are K through 12 standards, that we do need to keep in mind that whatever standard or benchmark we're going to have or indicator, that it's appropriate for all kids K through 12. So we have folks that have real expertise in middle school. And so you are going to bring the lens of middle school as these are developed to kind of cross-check and say, does this feel right for middle school? What would be right for middle school? So we're not actually creating them that way, but it's a lens in which to make sure that they're attending to all kids. And I think that important to note here in a conversation I had from earlier this morning is to think about that the language should be really clear, especially as we get to the indicators, because we could be talking about kindergartners, right? We have some kindergartners that might be more advanced than an 8th grader in some component, right, or competency area. So we need to make sure that that language is really accessible across, across all of the standards, across the indicators. So that's kind of the orientation in which to look at these through. Okay, so if we can move on. Sharon, can we move on to the next slide? Whoops. Oh, Sharon keeps disappearing. This happened.
Sorry, let me bring that up. Yeah.
There
Zoom
you are. Yay. You
Zoom
didn't disappear all the way.
It keeps kicking me out. So let me bring up that slide. Oh, goodness. Hang on. Yeah, it kicked me out. Let me get this. Let me get the thing working on.
Are you all okay if we just keep moving? You all have it open? Okay, awesome. So some of my own work, I felt like this is a really worthy thing to keep exploring and to keep talking to folks, right, in the field that are going to be impacted by all of this. And so what I did is I met with some of the other content specialists that are in my team. So where I sit in ODE, I get to work with like the math specialist, the social studies specialist, the language arts specialist, who have been helping support standards and development of standards and revising standards over time. So they have a lot of experience in this. And one of the things that is important for us to consider is really thinking about what is a standard versus what is guidance. And I will say this gets really meta, but it gets confusing. And when you throw a framework in there, it kind of gets confusing where all of these things live. And so just want to say that. And so one of the things that came up in these conversations with my team members is that it's really important to consider time and space. So how much time and space is provided for these standards? So math, right? We know that happens K through 12. There's a certain amount of minutes that students need to have seat time for math across the day. Same thing for language arts, same thing for health. SEL just does not have that. We don't have like mandated minutes or a time where this lives. This is going to be shouldered by the educators who are teaching their content and now also teaching these skills. So I think that's an important thing, contextual piece to really know, because that is our audience. That's who we need to integrate these standards. And then considering the cognitive load for teachers. So if I teach AP Bio and I have already a manual of all the standards and all the things I'm supposed to teach, and now I have this document, we need to consider the cognitive load that is going to come up when these are opened, right? So if we have 30-page document of standards, we have to think, is this going to be easily implemented? What is the response of the teacher who is accountable to these? So what is our entry point to make them open and that teachers will want to do this. So I think that idea of cognitive load is something we need to wrestle with as these get developed. And then this idea of ease of integration. So if they become really prescriptive and really fine-tuned, it becomes harder and harder to think about how they may fit within my curriculum, right? So we have to consider that. So where does this fit in terms of the ability and ease of integration for these standards within the content area of educators? And then thinking about that this doesn't just happen in math class, that this really could be about the bus drivers and the cafeteria folks, right? And the district TOSAs that come in and help, like the easier and the more memorable the standards are, the more we're actually going to be able to use them and name them and bring awareness to them. So just something for us to think about. And then this idea of learning progression. So in my conversation with the specialist, they said that any kind of learning progression is really more of a guidance tool. So it is not the standard itself. It is a supportive tool that teachers can turn to if they need a set of look-fors or ideas to turn to think about how they might integrate them. But it is not the actual standards themselves. So it would be part of guidance. So that was my conversation with them. Then I talked to some SEL TOSAs. Annie, I see your hand. You want to chime in now?
Yeah, does that just mean that we shouldn't be thinking about the look-fors, or that's
I'm not suggesting that at all, because you all have decided that you want to do that. What we'll get to is a place where we want to share some proposals of like where it can live. Because it is really helpful, and it helps teachers really understand, like, oh, I see what this means. So there's a place for that. We just want to think about where is the best place for that. So thank you for the question. And so in talking to some TOSAs, and I talked to 5 people, which is kind of the homework we're going to all send you on, is to talk to 5 educators. Just ask them what's important as we develop these standards. What do you really want to keep in mind? And these are some of the things that they shared, that we need to consider how they're going to be received by educators. What's their feeling? Are they going to feel like they are trusted? Are they not? Those feelings, initial responses are going to matter. What assumptions might we be making? And are we taking a strength-based approach? So just something to consider around how they're received. And then also this idea of what is the role of the state in creating the standards? What is the role of ESDs and districts? Because they all have agency and they are the most responsive to their personalized contexts, right? They know their students and their families more than we do where we are right now. So something that they shared was, are we going to empower and expand the leadership beyond the state level to provide that agency and collaboration alongside our districts and ESDs? And then what will support the practice and what will shift the practice? So again, this was really thoughtful. I had a great conversation with actually someone from Hillsborough who said, yeah, there's the standards, but then you could tell someone, we want you all to stand in front of the door and greet your students at the door when they come in. Let's say we say that. So there's that piece of it, but then there's the reality where a teacher could do that and say, sit down, take out just say it in a way that is not welcoming or affirming or gentle or caring. So that's different, right? That's about implementation, and that's about discourse. So what is the professional learning that has to happen to help orient that educator, right, to the ideas and tenets of transformative SEL? The standards themselves are not going to do that. It's going to be the professional learning, the relationships, the district staff, the trust that has been built in that can help support some of that. So what is the role of discourse at that point? Okay, we're going to do one more slide and then we'll pause for some questions here. And the last piece of this is, these are transformative standards. The very tenets of transformative SEL is that they're about co-construction and co-learning. I'm going to say that one more time. They're about co-construction and co-learning. So how do we envision partnering with our students, with our families, and with our educators? Where will they have agency? Where will there be opportunity for collaborative problem solving? And are the standards going to spark or limit curiosity? Are the standards going to spark or limit the identities that we are affirming? And so just making sure that the standards really need to embody the transformative approach. So as we develop these, it's a really important noticing to cross-check and check in and see, how those are playing out or not playing out and how they're written, developed, and shared. So what we're proposing is that if we move to the next slide, we want you to sit with this a little bit. And some of you have had a chance to play around with this earlier this morning to start moving into the benchmark standards and indicators. But we would like and invite you to talk to 5 educators and to think about what do you want them to sound like, feel like, and look like? And then bring that back to our next January session. And we have a couple proposals of where we can move next. And there's other ideas. So if you think of something, please unmute and let us know. You can email me. As things come up, I know that some of us ruminate outside of just the space. But what we're proposing is that the indicators, right, that progression, which is more about a tool and guidance, that really can be part of the framework for each of the standards. And so that's one possibility. It's also a possibility that the indicators, we decide that they are created by districts who know their communities more intimately, and that the framework provide general guidance to them about how those are to be developed. So you all could say, we're going to leave it up to you to come up with this tool, but we want to make sure that, they're not by grade bands, or you could name some things that you want them to consider. That's another option. It's also another option that they could be part of guidance and they don't even sit in the framework or standards, that is a body that happens outside of this group. So there will be ongoing guidance. That's my job, is to support guidance after you all have determined the standards. And so that's another place where that could potentially live. And then there are other ideas. So I'm going to open it up to any discussion, questions, ideas you want to share, things that you want to mention at this time. Yeah, Claudia.
So, and I think it's just coming up because there's a little bit of verbiage that I've seen throughout these last few slides around developmentally appropriate, one size fits all. And so I guess how do we see special education students falling into these categories? Is that something that we're later going to look at in the implementation stage of, how are these standards going to, in developing these standards, are we considering the developmental appropriateness for students with special educations and their differences?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So important. And I think that is where that language of the guiding principle really articulates that it's for everyone. And in our engagement with special education council, they have very much, they want these standards because they think that this will be a way to just ensure that, they're feeling confident that there'll be less referrals potentially to special education if we are attending to these, skills that we're all developing at all times, even as adults. So I think that intentionality is something that has been welcomed by all the SPED engagement we've done. But I think that's why we're moving away from, at this grade is, you should be here. At this grade, you really should be here. That doesn't feel responsive to how students are showing up on a continuum. Or if I'm really angry one day, I may, I'll be off the charts and that's okay. So it's just that idea of flexibility. Yeah, developmental is developmental, right? So does this feel like an okay thing to explore and talk through with folks in your work sphere and context?
Can I just ask a clarifier,
Yeah,
Vanessa? Specifically right now, kind of what are we doing with the indicators?
Yeah, so I would
Okay.
say the priority really today is to really get the best you can get with your benchmark and standards. So that would be the number one priority. And if you can, I think there's no harm in still moving into the indicators and populating that, because we recognize that that's helpful, and it's just, where will it be? So I guess it's kind of like a both and, until we come back and then figure out where's the best place for this.
Okay, so that last slide where you had, here are some options and there are more, is kind of
Yeah.
just out there for now.
It is, yes.
Okay, we're not landing on that today.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, just because we think it's important to, talk to folks and hear from other perspectives. Christina.
I just also want to clarify a couple of things. So first off, are we writing one standard for each competency? Okay, so in the end of today, our goal is that we have like one very general standard. And then I know in the earlier session, we talked about being very cognizant of each benchmark that we create. There would be multiple indicators. So keep those benchmarks also very succinct. And so we're still saying like one standard that is that overarching the what. Then your benchmarks are really more about like that sort of assessment piece, the knowledge and their abilities. And we can have conversations about the indicators, but realistically right now we want to focus on those two to then be able to have the conversation after we get more feedback on where would it be best to fully develop indicators and have those placed.
Yeah, that
Okay,
sounds,
thank you.
that's mirroring what I was thinking. And so each of you are in work groups working on a specific standard, right? So there'll be a total of 5 standards, with potentially you could each have, 3 to 5 benchmarks. And yes, so each one of you is developing that. And so that's why, it gets more and more cognitively heavy and harder to be memorable if we're going to implement, I've seen some documents that are like 30 pages, right? So again, I think our shared goal is we want this to take off and we want this to work. And we have to kind of right size where these things are and where these things live. All right. Y'all want to get into it? Get into the world? So with that, I think what we'll do is, why don't we take a 5-minute break and come back at 1:55, and then we will at that point start splitting us off into little work groups. And those of you that were not here this morning will hang back just for some shared learning that the morning group had. So we'll come back at 1:55. Annie, are you going anywhere fun for break?
No,
Shocking.
I'm staying at home.
Well, you got your cute dog.
Yeah, snuggle with him. My partner's also gone this weekend, so I was
Jenny has Astoria going.
The weather's nice today.
Yay. I heard that the Goonies house sold.
Yes, I can see the driveway out my window and
Oh, wow.
I'm 4 houses away from it.
Okay.
So I'm hoping that it will improve our property value. That's
You know, it was like over $1 million, right?
one
Was
point
it like-
six million, and
Wow.
word on the street, so take that with whatever, is that it is 2 people who Goonies was their childhood memories. And one of the people might be, this is the might, the Goldberg who writes and produces the Goldbergs, that sitcom, and that he has a second script of the Goonies. And if he owns the house, it would cut down a lot of, it would streamline a lot of the process for filming. But that might be something that's grown in the community. I don't know. My husband works at Costco and he gets all of the insight from the people who come in there.
Oh my gosh, I love it.
That's awesome. I love just the story around it. That's so fun.
Oh,
Yeah, it's hostility in our block. We're one of the only people in the block who find it interesting. Most of the other, we even had some people sitting outside on their porches for a couple summers taking data to tell the city how horrible it was. So
oh, geez.
we all knew when we moved in here, though. No, none of these people complaining were here
That's
before the
good.
Goonies movie was shot. So
All right, everyone, I'm going to bring us back. And what we're going to do at this point is we're going to pretty quickly release you into your groups. So those of you who've joined us this morning, we're going to allow you to join your work groups when you're ready. And then what we're going to do is just take a few minutes. We're going to review with the others who weren't here this morning, just to kind of reset us. But we want you, when you get into your work groups, this is the time where you can take a few minutes and review what others have been working on earlier this morning. It'd be a great time to provide any feedback or comments that you might have, and you could use the suggestion mode off to the side. I think it was Standards 5 group, or either 4 or 5 had asked for, Christina, were you 4 or 5? 5, they had maybe asked for some feedback. So if others are interested in feedback, you can go ahead and just put some comments in there. And others who weren't here this morning, again, we're going to catch you up to speed on some of the things that you missed, and then get you quickly into your groups. When you join the group, for those of you that we need to refresh or cover what happened this morning, when you get to your group, that'll be the time where you all can share your connection activity. And so right now what we're going to do is, I think Sharon's going to open up the breakout rooms if you want to go. If you want a refresher, feel free to stay with us if you want to do that. So just a reminder about some of you had picked roles this morning, and feel free to either continue in those roles. You can see the different ones listed here. We have a link where you can see what they are and kind of like what you would do. And then feel free to switch up if you want to switch up this afternoon. And Sharon's opened up the breakout rooms, and we're going to move into walking you through now about the writing guidance and instructions again.
So those of you that were not here this morning, you're going to stay here on the main call. So we have the same language and guidance. And then those of you that were here this morning, you're going to go into your breakout rooms and spend the first 10 minutes just looking at other people's work. So kind of look outside and make some noticings and some comments, and let that be kind of like your first activity.
Sharon, if you want to go to the next slide, Vanessa is going to pick up. Thank you.
All right. Hello, PM SEL Phase 2 group. Nice to be with you all. It's nice that it's a small little gathering. Oh, I love you all. All right, so we are going to get in. And so basically what we did, and what you'll see is just a way for us to make sure that our standards, our collective standards, are using a unified approach, because right, we're all going to be in breakout groups working on specific standards, but they're holistic. They're an entity as a whole. They're a holistic body of work. And so we want to make sure that we have consistent language, consistent framing, consistent approach to looking at verbs as we develop these. So that's kind of what this little orientation will be about. We wanted to differentiate, and then you all will pop into your groups to see what they've done, because they've started some things this morning. So do you all have any questions or yet? All right.
Unless maybe you have like a brain refresher that's on the verge of exhaustion and doesn't really have the capacity to do a lot of deep thinking right now.
Who, I don't?
No, I'm asking if you have a refresher that can like turn my brain on or revive it from its.
Telling me, Vanessa, you need a refresher.
Oh no,
like,
that would not be good
right.
self-awareness and or self-management or relationship skills or responsible decision making.
You know, we're taking care of all of those right now. So
yeah.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah.
No, I think you know, this is, I just want people to not be stressed. So this is just a first attempt. This is a draft. This is the really messy part that is messy and feels messy. So don't feel like you have to have your most, there's no perfect SEL. So just know that we're going to keep coming back on this, and that feedback, there'll be so many opportunities for feedback every time we meet. So there will be lots of eyes on this, and you will have eyes on lots of things. So don't feel like shy or like that things have to come out perfect. We expect it to be super clunky and messy. And as you get into your group, you're going to realize that it really is. And that's okay. That's part of like storming, norming, you know, collaborating and sorting through the mess. So we expect that, and we encourage that. So yeah,
well,
just bring your whole self as you are.
Thank you. Appreciate the grace.
Yeah. Okay, so I think the best way to orient us in this is I put it in the chat. And so really the standards are attempting to answer this question: what do students need to know and be able to do? And then the framework is going to answer what will support the standards. So that's kind of this idea of a garden. The framework is cultivating the standards. So what would we put into the soil? What are some things that we're going to pay attention to? So that the standards are the flowers that bloom, right? So what are those kind of pieces? There might be structural, implementation considerations that are going to help surface some beautiful flowers. And then the standards are really about, they're really student-based. So we want to attend to the adult components kind of in the framework, but the standards, we're really thinking about what are students going to, you know, how we're going to develop their own SEL abilities. So with that, what you'll see is some definitions for what a standard is, what a benchmark is, and what an indicator is, and then an example. So we just kind of, Beth and I took a chance at trying one. It's mostly from Washington, but we just wanted to see what does it look like at a standard level, which is really kind of very broad based, right? Like conceptual. And then a benchmark is really like, what is the actual knowledge and ability that a student is going to need or demonstrate? So kind of like we're moving into the more visible parts. And then the indicators are really these like I can statements that are going to share, right, and help inform teachers as to how to go about integrating these in the day. So we have those sentence frames that are consistent. So individuals can, the knowledge and ability to, and then the I can. And what you'll see is we're using Webb's depth of knowledge as the anchoring so that we are making sure we have one at a depth of level at 1, one at 2, one at 3, and one at 4. And so we want to pull verbs that align us to that developmental space. And then you'll see as we move down, there's also just kind of this DOK chart, like what do we mean for each of these different, you know, levels of depth? What are we talking about? And then how to write a standard. So really what you're doing, so Tracy and is it Shayna or is it Shayna?
Yeah, hi. Sorry,
Hi,
I'm
Shayna.
actually just listening in. I think that was, I don't mean to be intruding too much. I'm just listening in, so I'm not.
Or are you from the public?
What's that?
Are you from like outside the group then?
Yes, so I am with
Yay.
the Confederate Tribes of Umatilla Indian Reservation.
Yay,
So I
good. Glad
just
to have you here.
wanting to get more engaged and pay attention, and so
Appreciate that.
really
Yeah,
appreciate the work that you're doing.
awesome. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yep.
So really Tracy and Chris, what we have there is the standard and the benchmark, and really Tracy, this is for you. You're going to be braiding the focal construct with the competency. So if you scroll down below, you'll see that there's some language and description for the focal construct and for your competency. And that's really what that'll help keep us in our lane so that we're not moving into someone else's standard, right? Because these are the kind of concepts that are going to live within the standard. So we want to pull language and words from both of these and other sources as well. You all have wisdom and experience, so that's why you're here. And then up at the top are some models and examples in blue. And so these are just some helpful anchorings, like the California standards are helpful because they do have the transformative SEL language. And then we've got the Washington ones as well, which were a place that were identified earlier in the phase 1 group as just kind of in line with the work that we're doing. And then the Learning for Justice has social justice standards as well that are helpful to pull from because they've already done great work. And then where it says phase 2 advisory group tools, if you all have, you know, things that would be helpful to add, please do. Like this Prescott rubric for equity. It's really like an equity rubric, came from Krishana. And so that's a helpful place to also turn to as these get developed. So that's kind of our guidance. So it's kind of a scaffolded approach to developing them, and a place you can turn to for directions, or if you get a little lost, to help kind of orient your group. Do you have any questions at this point?
I don't think so. I think I'm ready to jump in.
Ready to jump in? Yay!
What's going on this morning? And
I know they've been waiting for you, Tracy.
I know. Keeping me busy at work.